My name is Lila Hart, and this is the story of how I reclaimed my life from the wreckage of betrayal and indifference. It began with what seemed like a simple accident, but in truth, it was the tipping point in years of quiet injustices, simmering beneath the surface of my family dynamic. It happened during the final semester of my master's program, a time when every moment, every file, every ounce of energy was pouring into one thing: my thesis. That thesis wasn't just a paper. It was the culmination of years of study, sacrifice, and hard-won academic growth. Every source, every carefully crafted paragraph, every sleepless night was stored on my laptop, the device that had become my lifeline. And in one thoughtless, infuriating act, my brother Mason destroyed it all. I still remember the sound, the sickening crunch of metal and plastic giving way beneath his fist. His temper, always lurking beneath the surface, finally boiled over during an argument that wasn't even about me. But I became the collateral damage. My laptop shattered, along with months of research, notes, and drafts meticulously prepared for submission. In that instant, I lost what felt like my entire future. But the true devastation wasn't found in cracked glass or corrupted files. It came from what followed. When I turned to my parents, desperate for support, understanding, justice, I was met with something colder than silence: dismissal. My parents, Amelia and David, didn't just fail to stand by me. They actively defended Mason. They minimized my loss, called me dramatic. And worse, they implied that I somehow provoked him. Their words stung more than his actions ever could. It wasn't just about the broken laptop. It never had been. That moment laid bare a truth I had spent most of my life trying to ignore. The scales in my family had always been tipped in Mason's favor. From the earliest days, his shortcomings were forgiven, his mistakes brushed aside with knowing sighs and indulgent smiles. But me, my failures were dissected, my emotions dismissed as overreactions, my achievements quietly overlooked. Mason was the golden boy, the charming, impulsive, endlessly excused firstborn. I was the emotional one, the sensitive one, the one expected to keep the peace, to shrink myself for the sake of family harmony, even when that harmony came at my expense. For years, I tried to accommodate this imbalance. I told myself that one day, things would change. One day, they'd see me for who I truly was: capable, driven, worthy. But that day never came. And when I watched my thesis, the product of months of dedication, crushed beneath Mason's careless rage, I understood something with sharp, undeniable clarity. I couldn't wait for them to see me. I had to see myself. I had to stop hoping for justice from people who had never offered it willingly. That moment was a fracture, a breaking point. But from that break came something else: resolve. I decided I would no longer be the quiet casualty of my family's favoritism. I would no longer water myself down to fit within the cracks of their denial. Instead, I would become my own advocate. Rebuilding my thesis was just the beginning. Rebuilding my dignity, my boundaries, my self-worth. That was the real work ahead. What followed wasn't easy. It was a painful, humbling, and at times lonely process. But I fought. For my academic future, for my voice, for my right to be heard and respected. I proved to myself that I could rise from the devastation stronger, smarter, and entirely on my own terms. This story isn't just about a broken laptop. It's about how one act of sabotage shattered the illusion of family unity and exposed the dysfunctional patterns I had tolerated for far too long. It's about the quiet rage of being unheard, the exhaustion of being the peacekeeper, and the liberation that comes when you finally stop begging to be understood by those determined not to see you. In telling my story, I hope others find the courage to stand up in the face of injustice, even, and especially, when it comes from those who are supposed to love us unconditionally. I didn't just survive what Mason did. I triumphed in spite of it. And what once felt like the end of everything turned out to be the beginning of everything I truly needed. It happened on a gray, rainy Friday afternoon, the kind of day where the clouds pressed down on the earth like a weight. I had just returned from campus, my backpack soaked, my clothes clinging to me, my shoes squelching with every step. But beneath the discomfort pulsed quiet satisfaction. I had finally done it. After months of research, sleepless nights, and battling self-doubt, I had completed the final draft of my thesis. The relief was overwhelming. I backed up the file onto my external hard drive, the tiny silver device that now contained my entire academic future, and set my laptop carefully on my desk. My room was a mess of textbooks and printed articles, but the laptop was my anchor, the heart of all my work. Satisfied that everything was safe, I left it there and headed for a long overdue shower. The hot water pounded down, washing away exhaustion and tension. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to imagine life after graduation, a future that finally felt within reach. But that feeling shattered the moment I stepped back into my room. Mason was there, standing over my desk. His broad shoulders were hunched, his face unreadable, and at his feet lay my laptop. Screen cracked, glass splintered, the faint smell of burnt circuits in the air. A tiny spark fizzled from the damaged keyboard. I froze, the towel clutched around me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "What did you do?" My voice cracked, thin and shaky. Mason shrugged, a smirk ghosting across his face. "It fell. Maybe you shouldn't leave your stuff lying around." My eyes darted across the room. My external drive was gone. The realization settled like ice in my chest. This wasn't clumsiness. This was intentional. I had seen the signs before. The mysteriously deleted files, disorganized papers, passive-aggressive jabs about how I thought I was better than everyone. But I had brushed it off, made excuses. Not this time. This time, the malice was undeniable. I ran to my parents, heart pounding, anger and panic tangled together. Surely they would see the truth. Surely this crossed a line. But instead of concern, I was met with indifference. "You're overreacting, Lila," my mother said, folding laundry with mechanical efficiency, eyes never leaving the pile of clothes. "It's just a laptop." "It wouldn't happen if you weren't so territorial about your things," Dad chimed in, not even looking up from his phone. No outrage, no apology, no consequences for Mason. Just the same tired narrative. Lila is dramatic. Mason is misunderstood. I walked back to my room in a fog of disbelief. The shattered screen reflected back a truth I could no longer deny. I was alone in this. The tears came fast. Frustration, heartbreak, exhaustion all pouring out at once. I cried until my pillow was damp and my throat raw. But when the tears dried, something else settled in. Not despair, resolve. I refused to let Mason's sabotage end my academic journey. As shattered as I felt, I wasn't going to hand him that victory. The next morning, with swollen eyes and trembling hands, I emailed my advisor, Professor Malik. I debated over how much to reveal. I didn't want to sound unprofessional, or worse, like I was making excuses, but honesty won out. I told him the truth. My laptop was destroyed, my external drive was gone, and with them, the nearly completed version of my thesis. Though I hesitated to explicitly blame Mason, Professor Malik quickly pieced it together. There was a pause on the other end of the call when I mentioned my brother's accidental involvement. Then came his calm, steady voice. Exactly what I needed. "We'll find a way, Lila," he assured me. "You've come too far to let this stop you." His belief in me was the spark I desperately needed. With his help and encouragement, I started to rebuild. I dug through old email attachments, lecture notes, scribbled outlines. It wasn't perfect, but there were fragments, breadcrumbs of the work I had poured my heart into. Slowly, painstakingly, I began piecing it all back together. To my surprise, my peers rallied around me. Classmates I barely spoke to offered to share sources, lend notes, and even proofread my drafts. Study partners forwarded articles they thought I'd find useful. It was humbling. I had spent so long isolated in my own frustration. I hadn't realized the quiet network I'd built, one that now became my lifeline. But outside of campus, the tension at home only deepened. Mason acted as if nothing had happened. My parents avoided the subject altogether, retreating behind their walls of denial. But I couldn't afford to retreat. Instead, I started documenting everything. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I combed through Mason's social media, emails, even old files on our shared family computer. What I found only confirmed what I had long suspected. He had plagiarized a term paper for a business course he proudly claimed to have passed. Worse, he had taken out credit cards in our parents' names and defaulted on payments. I quietly gathered proof: screenshots, documents, emails, transaction records. At first, I didn't know what I'd do with it all, but the simple act of collecting the truth grounded me. For the first time, I wasn't doubting myself. The truth was tangible, and it was mine to wield. When I finally confronted Mason, it wasn't in anger. It was in clarity. I found him in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone like nothing in the world could touch him. The same smug confidence, the same careless posture. But this time, I wasn't the fragile sister begging for acknowledgement. I was done with that role. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He barely looked up. "If this is about your stupid laptop, let it go. You're so dramatic." There it was. The familiar dismissal, the infuriating grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. But it didn't sting this time. I wasn't here for his approval. I wasn't here to beg. "No," I said quietly. "I'm done letting things go. You need help, Mason. Real help, and I'm not covering for you anymore." His grin faltered for a fraction of a second. "What the hell are you talking about?" I slid the folder across the table. Printed emails, screenshots, transaction records, the plagiarized term paper with timestamps, and the fraudulent credit card statements bearing our parents' names. His eyes flickered as he skimmed the pages, the color draining from his face. "You think this scares me?" he scoffed, trying to regain his bravado. But there was a crack in his voice now, thin and sharp. "It's not about scaring you," I replied. "It's about consequences. You've skated by for years, but this time you don't get to hide behind Mom and Dad." He shoved the papers aside, trying to look unaffected. But I could see it, the panic creeping in. The next day, I submitted the plagiarism evidence to his university's academic integrity office. It wasn't easy, and part of me ached at how far things had come. But I owed it to myself, to the version of me who cried into her pillow while everyone else shrugged. I also filed a fraud report with the bank, attaching every piece of evidence I'd gathered. The investigations didn't start with fireworks or dramatic confrontations. They began quietly, methodically. But for the first time, Mason was no longer shielded. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need my family's permission to stand up for myself. I had my voice. And finally, I was using it. The consequences came hard and fast, in ways Mason never saw coming. His university acted swiftly once the plagiarism investigation concluded. Within weeks, he was expelled, stripped of the degree he had boasted about and the future he had carelessly risked. The fallout didn't stop there. The fraud report I submitted to the bank triggered a full financial audit. When the truth came to light, the bank demanded repayment for the debts Mason had racked up in our parents' names. The facade my family had clung to for so long, the golden boy, the perfect son, crumbled under the weight of his lies. My parents, Amelia and David, were forced to reckon with the mess. The financial strain, the public embarrassment, the quiet whispers among friends and relatives. They could no longer look the other way. For the first time, they had to face not just Mason's actions, but their own blind loyalty, their years of enabling him. And yet, amidst the wreckage, something remarkable happened. My thesis, the one Mason had tried to destroy, the project I rebuilt from scraps and sleepless nights, didn't just survive. It thrived. The final version, refined by necessity, sharpened by adversity, was stronger than I ever imagined. My advisor, Professor Malik, encouraged me to submit it for a national academic award. I almost didn't. Part of me still struggled to believe I deserved it after everything. But I did it anyway. When I received the acceptance letter weeks later, I stared at it in disbelief. Not only had my thesis been selected, it had won. I was invited to present my research at a prestigious academic conference in Boston. Suddenly, the project Mason tried to sabotage became my greatest triumph, the very thing that opened doors I never dared dream of. I packed my bags, boarded the plane, and stood in front of scholars and peers from across the country, sharing my work with confidence I had fought hard to reclaim. Back home, my parents watched it all unfold with stunned silence. The son they defended had fallen, and the daughter they dismissed was thriving. There was no satisfaction in their shame. I wasn't seeking revenge, but there was peace in their silence, in my independence, and in knowing I had finally stepped out of their shadow. I had survived, and more than that, I had won, on my own terms. Months later, life presented me with an unexpected, almost poetic opportunity, the kind that makes you wonder if the universe really does have a sense of justice. The old family estate, the sprawling property where we used to gather every summer, had gone up for auction. Once a place of laughter and tradition, it had slowly fallen into disrepair, much like the illusion of our perfect family. Years of neglect, unpaid taxes, and poor management had left it abandoned and forgotten. It should have hurt to see it that way, a shell of the memories I once held dear. But as I walked the overgrown grounds and creaked open the faded front door, I didn't feel sadness. I felt closure. With the award money from my thesis recognition, careful savings, and some help from the connections I had built, I placed a bid, and I won. The news spread quickly. My parents were stunned. Mason, I heard, was still struggling to find his footing after his expulsion and legal troubles. Suddenly, the forgotten family estate was back in our orbit, but this time I held the keys. Not long after, my parents reached out, tentative and rehearsed, asking if they could reserve the house for a family reunion, an attempt, no doubt, to patch over old wounds with forced nostalgia. For the first time, I didn't hesitate. "I appreciate the gesture," I replied calmly, "but I'm focusing on rebuilding my peace." I let the silence hang for a moment before adding, "And peace means keeping my boundaries intact." It was the most powerful no I had ever spoken. There was no bitterness in my voice, no anger, just certainty. The estate wasn't just land or bricks and mortar. It was a symbol, a reminder of everything I had endured and everything I had reclaimed. It no longer belonged to the family that overlooked me. It belonged to me, the woman they underestimated, the one they tried to silence, the one who rose anyway. I wasn't that desperate peacekeeping girl anymore. This was my final blow, not out of vengeance, but out of quiet, unshakable strength. And it tasted better than any revenge ever could. Looking back now, I don't feel bitterness. That used to surprise me. For a long time, I thought anger was the only fuel I had left, the only thing strong enough to propel me forward after what Mason and my parents had done, or failed to do. But time has a way of softening the edges, not erasing the past, but reshaping how it lives inside you. What remains isn't anger, it's pride. Pride in the woman I became when everything I counted on collapsed. Pride in how I refused to let sabotage and neglect define my worth. Pride in how I stood my ground, even when the people I should have been able to trust the most turned their backs on me. For years, I waited for something that never came. Apologies, accountability, understanding. I twisted myself in knots trying to be heard, to be seen, to earn their love on terms that were never fair to begin with. But not anymore. I no longer waste my energy waiting for apologies from those unwilling or unable to give them. Their silence, their denial, their shame, they belong to them, not me. What I built, that belongs to me. I rebuilt my thesis. I rebuilt my confidence. I rebuilt my boundaries. I created my own space, brick by metaphorical brick. A space where I am safe, where my voice matters, where my success isn't diminished by resentment or jealousy. And with every step, I peeled away the version of myself shaped by their expectations, the peacekeeper, the scapegoat, the overlooked daughter, and uncovered the person I was always meant to be. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but whole, on my own terms. The journey wasn't easy. It was messy and painful, and at times lonely, but it was mine, and for the first time that's enough. I look in the mirror now, and I don't see the girl who cried into her pillow, shattered by betrayal. I see the woman who rose from that wreckage, stronger, smarter, and finally free. And that is worth more than any apology ever could be. At its heart, this story is one of transformation, not just of circumstances, but of identity, relationships, and hard-earned self-awareness. Every character begins this journey in a state of imbalance, shaped by their flaws, fears, and choices. But by the end, the fault lines are exposed, and no one emerges unchanged. Asterisk, asterisk. Lila Hart. Asterisk, asterisk begins as the classic peacekeeper, the overlooked daughter who learned early on that in her family, keeping quiet and minimizing her pain was the only way to keep the fragile illusion of harmony intact. She is intelligent, ambitious, and quietly determined, but those qualities are overshadowed by her desperation for approval, particularly from her parents, who have made it clear that their loyalty lies elsewhere. For most of her life, Lila internalized the family's skewed dynamics, believing that her emotions were excessive and her accomplishments insignificant in comparison to Mason's effortless charm. But the laptop incident, calculated, deliberate, and devastating, shatters that illusion. For the first time, Lila is forced to confront the painful truth. Her family's version of love has always been conditional, and their refusal to hold Mason accountable is not her failure, it's theirs. What follows is not an immediate transformation, but a gradual, gritty evolution. She moves from shock to heartbreak, from heartbreak to quiet resolve, and from resolve to empowerment. Lila's greatest development is not just in reclaiming her academic work or exposing Mason's lies, but in the quiet, unwavering boundaries she builds for herself. She learns that true peace does not come from being understood by those determined to dismiss her, but from no longer needing their validation at all. By the end, Lila is not hardened by bitterness, but strengthened by clarity. She is strategic, self-assured, and fiercely independent, a woman who writes her own narrative, regardless of who refuses to read it. Asterisk, asterisk, Mason Hart. Asterisk, asterisk, in contrast, is a character in steady decline. His entitlement is apparent from the beginning, whether through the casual destruction of Lila's property, his smug dismissal of her anger, or his reckless financial choices. Mason is not merely a villain. He is the product of years of unchecked behavior and blind parental loyalty. He represents the danger of enabling dysfunction. The boy who never had to face consequences becomes the man incapable of growth. Even when exposed, Mason's instinct is not to reflect, but to deflect, to belittle, to hide behind the crumbling safety net his parents provided. Asterisk, asterisk, Amelia and David Hart. Asterisk, asterisk, Lila's parents are tragic not because they suffer, but because they refuse to evolve. Their unwavering defense of Mason is rooted in denial, pride, and fear. The fear of admitting that their perfect family narrative was flawed all along. Throughout the story, they double down on their favoritism, brushing off Lila's pain and rationalizing Mason's behavior. But as the truth surfaces, the expulsion, the financial ruin, the lost estate, they are forced to confront the consequences they helped create. Yet even then, their growth is limited. Their silence at the end is not an act of enlightenment, but quiet resignation. Asterisk, asterisk. Supporting characters asterisk, asterisk like Professor Malik, Lila's academic peers, and even the bank investigators symbolize a different kind of family, the one we choose and build. They provide the affirmation, respect, and support Lila never received at home, underscoring a central truth, that found communities can become lifelines when blood ties falter. In the end, the story's essence lies in contrast. Some characters rise, others fall, but all are irrevocably changed. And through that change, Lila doesn't just reclaim what was taken from her, she claims herself,